Harold Brennan stopped mid-stride on the wooden dock, his morning coffee tumbling from arthritic fingers as he watched his 8-year-old granddaughter Emma slip beneath the dark waters of Millbrook Lake. The cup shattered against the weathered planks, sending ceramic shards skittering into the murky depths below. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here, not to her. Patricia's scream pierced the mountain air as she lunged toward the water, held back by her own terror of drowning. Other picnic-goers froze in horrified silence, their Labor Day celebration transformed into a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. Harold dove in despite his crippling arthritis, the same joints that had failed him 10 years ago when he couldn't save his son Michael. Now those same hands reached desperately for Emma, as the current pulled them both toward the dam's deadly overflow. "Help us!" he gasped, water filling his lungs. From the tree line burst a massive German Shepherd, the very dog Harold had spent 2 years trying to destroy. The same breed that haunted his nightmares. Could the animal he feared most become their only salvation? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. 2 years earlier, Thomas "Tom" Mitchell had learned that grief weighs exactly 53 pounds, the same as his son Danny's football gear, still hanging in the mudroom where Sarah used to remind their boy to hang up his cleats. At 52, Tom carried that weight in his chest every morning when he woke up alone in their ranch house on Elm Street, the silence so thick he could taste it. The drunk driver who killed his wife and 16-year-old son had walked away with minor injuries and a suspended license. Tom had walked away with a Purple Heart from Afghanistan, a disability pension of $1,400 a month, and survivor's guilt that gnawed at him like shrapnel working its way to the surface. Some wounds never heal clean. Millbrook Valley, Colorado, population 12,000, nestled 45 minutes from Denver in the shadow of the Rockies. It was the kind of place where neighbors still waved from their porches, and the biggest controversy was usually about snow removal schedules. That was before Harold Brennan made it his personal mission to rid the community of what he called dangerous animals. Harold Brennan commanded respect the way some men commanded fear, through relentless attention to detail and an unwavering belief in rules. At 66, the retired insurance adjuster had transformed the Millbrook Estates Homeowners Association into his personal fortress against chaos. His silver hair was always perfectly combed, his khakis always pressed, and his crusade against large dogs always justified by the same story. 10 years ago, his 12-year-old son Michael had died in a vicious dog attack. "I won't let what happened to Michael happen to another child," Harold would say at every HOA meeting, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly when he spoke his dead son's name. The community had watched him bury his boy, watched him build regulations like tombstones, no dogs over 50 pounds, no unleashed animals, no exceptions. Harold lived now with his daughter Patricia and 8-year-old granddaughter Emma in a pristine colonial where family photos lined the mantel like soldiers at attention. Patricia, 38 and recently separated from her deployed military husband, walked on eggshells around her father's grief. Emma, with her mother's dark hair and her grandfather's determined chin, had learned not to ask why they couldn't have a puppy like the other kids. The divide in Millbrook ran deeper than property lines. On one side lived families like Harold's, established, affluent, protective of their ordered world. On the other side were folks like Tom, veterans and blue-collar workers who understood that sometimes the best things in life came with rough edges. Between them sat Martha Collins, 73 years old and sharp as mountain air, who'd buried 2 husbands and raised 6 children and had no patience for foolishness from either camp. Dr. Rebecca Chen ran the only veterinary clinic within 30 miles, treating everything from prize cattle to beloved house cats. At 45, she'd seen enough animal-human bonds to know that love doesn't always follow rules, and enough cruelty to know that fear often masquerades as protection. None of them knew that a wounded puppy would soon test everything they believed about safety, family, and second chances. The September afternoon hung heavy with the promise of rain when Tom Mitchell took the long way home from his VA appointment, choosing the winding back roads over the interstate's aggressive traffic. His left leg ached, the shrapnel reminder of Kandahar that flared up before storms, and he needed the quiet that only these empty mountain roads could provide. The whimpering cut through his truck's rumbling engine like a child's cry. Tom pulled over near Miller's Creek, where the asphalt gave way to gravel and wildflowers pushed through the guardrail. The sound came again, weaker this time, from the drainage ditch that ran parallel to the road. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment and limped down the embankment, his boots sliding on the loose rock. What he found there would haunt him for months afterward. A German Shepherd puppy, maybe 8 weeks old, lay crumpled against the concrete culvert. Motor oil matted his golden and black fur, and his front leg bent at an impossible angle. Blood had dried around his muzzle, and his brown eyes, Danny's eyes, Tom thought with a sharp intake of breath, tracked Tom's movement with desperate hope. "Easy there, boy," Tom whispered, kneeling despite the pain in his knee. The puppy tried to crawl toward him and whimpered when his broken leg wouldn't support his weight. Fresh tire tracks in the mud told the story. Hit and run, probably sometime during the night, the puppy had dragged himself into the ditch to hide. Tom's hands shook as he reached for Danny's old football jersey, the one he kept folded in his truck's toolbox like a talisman. 3 years, and he still couldn't bring himself to wash it. The jersey smelled like grass stains and teenage dreams, and as he wrapped the puppy in it, he heard his son's voice as clearly as if Danny were sitting in the passenger seat. "Please, Dad." "Remember what you promised me?" Danny had begged for a German Shepherd for his 15th birthday. "Next year," Tom had said, the same thing he'd said every year since Danny turned 12. There was always a reason to wait. Money was tight. Sarah worried about their insurance. They'd get one when Danny graduated high school. Next year became never when a drunk driver ran a red light on Highway 36. The puppy's heartbeat fluttered against Tom's chest as he carried him to the truck. At Dr. Chen's clinic, the waiting room smelled like antiseptic and hope. Rebecca Chen emerged from the back room, her scrub stained and her expression weary from a long day of surgeries. "Hit and run," Tom explained, unwrapping the jersey. "Found him about 20 minutes ago." Dr. Chen's professional mask slipped for just a moment as she examined the puppy. Compound fracture of the radius, possible internal bleeding, severe dehydration. Surgery will run around $2,800, and even then, she looked up at Tom with kind but honest eyes. "He might never walk normally. Are you prepared for that?" Tom thought about his checking account, $312 until his next disability check. He thought about his mortgage payment due in 2 weeks. He thought about Danny, who would have sold his Xbox and worked extra shifts at the hardware store to save this puppy without hesitation. "His name is Rex," Tom said quietly. "Same name Danny picked out years ago. Can you save him?" "I can try. But Tom, the HOA regulations in your neighborhood, I'll deal with Harold Brennan." As if summoned by his name, Harold pushed through the clinic doors carrying a pet carrier with his daughter's Persian cat. He stopped short when he saw the German Shepherd puppy on the examination table, his face cycling through surprise, recognition, and something deeper, a flash of old pain that made him step backward. "You can't be serious," Harold said, his voice tight. "After everything this community has been through, you want to bring that animal into our neighborhood?" "He's just a puppy, Harold. He's hurt. They all start as puppies." Harold's hands clenched into fists. "My son started as a boy who loved dogs, and he died because someone thought their animal was special, thought the rules didn't apply to them. Dr. Chen cleared her throat. "Gentlemen, I have a patient who needs immediate attention. This discussion can wait." But Harold wasn't finished. "If you bring that dog into Millbrook Estates, I'll make sure the HOA board knows about it. We have regulations for a reason, Mitchell. Dangerous dogs over 50 pounds are prohibited. No exceptions." Tom looked down at Rex, who couldn't have weighed more than 15 pounds soaking wet. "He's not dangerous. He's dying." "Give him a year," Harold said, heading for the door. "Then we'll see how harmless he is." After Harold left, Tom sat in the clinic's parking lot for 20 minutes, the truck idling while he made the hardest decision he'd faced since burying his family. Rex would live or die based on what Tom decided in the next 5 minutes. Through the window, he could see Dr. Chen preparing her surgical instruments. He walked back inside and handed her his credit card. "Save him," he said. "Danny never got his dog. Maybe it's time." 6 weeks later, Rex had transformed from a broken puppy into a 40-pound adolescent with intelligence that startled even Dr. Chen. His front leg had healed with only a slight limp, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. What was impossible to miss was the bond between dog and man. Rex followed Tom everywhere, as if afraid his savior might disappear. Tom found himself healing too, in ways he hadn't expected. For the first time in 3 years, he woke up with purpose. Rex needed breakfast, needed walks, needed training. The dog's presence filled the hollow spaces in the house where Sarah's laughter and Danny's music used to echo. When Tom caught himself talking to Rex about the weather or the neighbors, he didn't feel crazy. He felt almost normal. But Harold Brennan was watching, documenting, waiting. The emergency HOA meeting was called for October 15th, a crisp Thursday evening, when the aspen leaves had turned gold and the first frost warnings appeared on the local news. The Millbrook Community Center filled beyond capacity. Over 200 residents packed into a space designed for half that number. Tom had never seen so many of his neighbors in one place, their faces a mixture of curiosity, concern, and predetermined positions. Harold stood at the podium like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments. Behind him, a projector screen displayed statistics about dog attacks, medical photos that made several elderly residents turn away, and a timeline of incidents involving German Shepherds across Colorado. His presentation was methodical, devastating, and deeply personal. 10 years ago, Harold began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, my son Michael was 12 years old. He loved baseball, wanted to be a veterinarian when he grew up, and never met a stray animal he wouldn't try to help. The room fell silent. On March 18, 2013, Michael died trying to protect a 2-year-old neighbor from a vicious dog attack. That dog was a German Shepherd mix, 90 pounds of muscle and aggression that its owner swore was gentle as a lamb. Harold clicked to the next slide, a hospital report with clinical descriptions of trauma that made Tom's stomach clench. 73 stitches. Emergency surgery. 3 days in intensive care before his little body gave up fighting. Harold's voice cracked for the first time. The dog's owner said all the same things we're hearing now. He's never done this before. He's great with kids. This was just a freak accident. The audience was riveted, even those who'd come to support Tom. Harold had painted a picture of every parent's worst nightmare with surgical precision. Mr. Mitchell claims his dog is different, Harold continued, but they all claim that statistics don't lie. German Shepherds are responsible for 10% of all serious dog attacks in this country, despite being only 2% of the dog population. Are we willing to gamble our children's safety on one man's emotional attachment to an animal? When Tom finally stood to respond, his legs felt unsteady. Public speaking had never been his strength. He was better with his hands than his words, more comfortable fixing engines than fixing arguments. The sea of faces staring back at him included neighbors he'd known for years, some nodding encouragingly, others already shaking their heads. "Harold's right about one thing," Tom began, his voice barely carrying to the back of the room. "Statistics don't lie, but they don't tell the whole story either." He pulled out a folded paper from his jacket pocket. Rex's veterinary records. Dr. Chen ran a DNA test on Rex. "He's only half German Shepherd. The other half is Golden Retriever." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Harold's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "I'm not asking you to take my word that Rex is safe," Tom continued. "I'm asking for the same thing any of you would want, a chance to prove it. Rex is already enrolled in professional training. He's passed his temperament test with flying colors, and if there's ever an incident, any incident at all, I'll remove him from the community immediately." Dr. Chen stood up from the audience. "If I may," she said, waiting for nods from the HOA board. "I've examined Rex multiple times. His temperament scores are in the 95th percentile for gentleness and trainability. In my professional opinion, he poses no more threat than any medium-sized dog in this community." The debate that followed grew heated. Parents shared their fears about children's safety. Dog owners argued about breed discrimination. Martha Collins stood up and delivered an impassioned speech about judging individuals rather than categories, drawing parallels that made several residents shift uncomfortably in their seats. When the vote was finally called, Tom held his breath. 127 in favor of allowing Rex to stay, 89 opposed. The margin was closer than he'd hoped, but it was enough. Harold's face was stone as the meeting adjourned, but he cornered Tom in the parking lot afterward. "This isn't over," Harold said quietly. "One incident, Mitchell. One complaint, one moment of aggression, one child frightened, and I'll have that animal removed so fast your head will spin." Tom nodded grimly. "I understand. But Harold, what happened to your son? Don't." Harold's voice was sharp as breaking glass. "Don't you dare try to psychoanalyze me. I know what killed my boy, and I know what I'm trying to prevent here." As Harold walked away, Tom noticed something flutter from the older man's jacket pocket. A wallet, fallen open on the asphalt. Tom picked it up, intending to call after Harold, but froze when he saw the photo tucked behind the driver's license. It was Harold, maybe 20 years younger, standing beside a young boy with Harold's chin and bright, trusting eyes. Between them sat a German Shepherd, tongue lolling out in a doggy grin. The boy's small hands were buried in the dog's thick fur, and both Harold and his son were laughing at something outside the camera's view. Tom stood alone in the parking lot, holding the wallet, understanding for the first time that Harold's war against German Shepherds wasn't really about statistics or community safety. It was about a father's grief that had calcified into fear, and a man who'd forgotten that he'd once trusted the very breed he now fought to ban. He returned the wallet without mentioning the photo, but the image burned in his memory. Harold Brennan hadn't always been afraid of dogs. Something had changed him, broken something fundamental in his relationship with the animals his son had obviously loved. Tom had won the battle, but he sensed the war was just beginning. Winter arrived early in Millbrook Valley that year, and with it came Tom's first real test of choosing between Rex and survival. By January, heating bills had climbed to $300 a month, while his disability pension remained stubbornly fixed at $1,400. The arithmetic was brutal. Heat the house or feed the dog properly. Some nights, Tom found himself eating peanut butter sandwiches while Rex enjoyed premium kibble, and he told himself it was a fair trade. The anonymous deliveries started appearing on his doorstep the second week of February. 50-pound bags of dog food, no note, no explanation. Tom suspected Martha Collins, but when he tried to thank her, she just smiled and said, "Must be your guardian angel working overtime." Rex had grown to 75 pounds of muscle and intelligence, no longer the cute puppy that had garnered sympathetic votes at the HOA meeting. His presence drew stares now, some admiring, others fearful. Harold's campaign against Rex had evolved from direct confrontation to systematic documentation. He carried a notebook everywhere, recording Rex's outdoor activities. February 8th, 7:23 a.m. Dog off-leash in front yard for 37 seconds. February 15th, 2:45 p.m. Dog barked twice at delivery truck. Tom began to feel like he was living under surveillance. Every walk, every training session potentially becoming evidence in Harold's growing case file. The pressure mounted on Patricia, too. 8-year-old Emma had begun asking increasingly difficult questions about why they couldn't have a puppy like some of her classmates. "Grandpa says dogs are dangerous," she told her mother one evening after school, "but Mrs. Peterson's dog helped find her when she got lost in the woods last month. How can dogs be dangerous and helpful?" Patricia found herself caught between her father's unwavering convictions and her daughter's natural curiosity about animals. When she tried to discuss it with Harold, his response was always the same. "How can you even consider bringing a dog into this house after what happened to your brother?" The weight of Michael's memory hung over every conversation, making it impossible to argue without seeming disloyal to the dead. March brought financial catastrophe. Rex developed a limp that worsened over several days until he could barely put weight on his rear leg. Dr. Chen's diagnosis was devastating. Hip dysplasia, a genetic condition that would require surgery costing $3,200. The same week, Tom's truck broke down, a transmission failure that would cost $1,800 to repair. Without the truck, he couldn't get to his part-time job at Henderson's Auto Repair. Tom sat in his kitchen at 3 in the morning, calculator and bills spread across the table like battle plans. His mortgage was 4 months behind. The electric company had sent a final notice. Rex lay at his feet, occasionally whimpering when he shifted position. The dog's pain was evident, but so was his trust. Rex still wagged his tail when Tom looked down at him, still pressed against Tom's leg when he sensed his human's distress. The rescue organization's business card sat on the table next to the bills. Rainbow Bridge German Shepherd Rescue had excellent facilities, Dr. Chen assured him, and they could afford Rex's surgery. Tom could visit, maybe even get him back when his finances improved. It was logical, responsible, the smart choice. But when Tom looked into Rex's eyes, he saw Danny's disappointed face from all those birthday conversations. "Next year, Dad. We'll get a dog next year." Martha Collins discovered the GoFundMe page by accident, created by her granddaughter in California after seeing a local news story about Tom and Rex. Help Tom Save Rex started small, $25 from Martha, $50 from Dr. Chen, $35 from the mail carrier who'd grown fond of Rex's daily greeting ritual. Then the story went viral. Local news picked up the fundraiser story, framing it as a battle between community compassion and bureaucratic regulation. The footage showed Rex performing his training routines, Tom speaking quietly about the healing power of second chances, and Harold defending community safety standards. Within 48 hours, donations poured in from across the country, $8,400 from complete strangers who'd been moved by a veteran's loyalty to his dog. "We had no idea you were struggling," Mrs. Peterson told Tom when she brought over a casserole and an envelope containing $200 in cash. "You should have said something." The irony wasn't lost on Tom. Harold's campaign against Rex had inadvertently revealed the community's capacity for generosity. Spring brought Rex back to full health and a new challenge: professional training. Tom enrolled Rex in an advanced obedience program run by Maria Santos, a former police dog handler whose reputation for results was matched only by her intolerance for excuses. Rex excelled, mastering complex commands and showing the kind of intelligence that made Maria shake her head in amazement. "I've trained hundreds of dogs," Maria told Tom after Rex flawlessly executed a 30-minute sequence of commands. "This one thinks like a human sometimes. He's reading your body language, anticipating your needs. Most dogs this smart end up working for police departments or the military." The breakthrough came when Maria suggested Rex attempt therapy dog certification. The test required Rex to remain calm while subjected to unexpected sounds, crowding by strangers, and interactions with people using medical equipment. He passed with perfect scores, opening the door to visits at the Millbrook nursing home. Tom watched Rex work his first day at the nursing home with something approaching awe. The dog seemed to understand instinctively which residents needed gentle companionship and which required more energetic interaction. 92-year-old Robert Chen, Dr. Chen's father-in-law, hadn't spoken coherently in months, but he spent 20 minutes telling Rex about the German Shepherd he'd owned as a boy in San Francisco. Word of Rex's therapy work spread through Millbrook's networks of family connections and church groups. Harold's mother-in-law, Dolores Hayes, lived at the nursing home and had become one of Rex's most devoted fans. When Patricia brought Emma for their weekly visit, Dolores gushed about that wonderful dog who visits every Tuesday. "Grandpa Harold says big dogs are dangerous," Emma said during one visit. Dolores, 86 years old and sharp as winter wind, looked directly at her great-granddaughter. "Honey, I've lived long enough to know that the most dangerous things in this world usually look perfectly safe. That dog has more kindness in his heart than some people I could mention." July brought the poisoning incident that nearly destroyed everything Tom had built. Rex collapsed during their evening walk, vomiting violently and struggling to breathe. Tom carried him to the truck. Rex's 75 pounds feeling like nothing, fueled by adrenaline and terror. Dr. Chen met them at the clinic, still in her pajamas, and immediately suspected antifreeze poisoning. "Someone deliberately fed this to him," she said grimly, after running blood tests. "Antifreeze has a sweet taste that attracts dogs, but in this concentration it was meant to kill." Rex spent 3 days in intensive care, his kidneys shutting down before slowly recovering. The police investigation yielded nothing concrete. No witnesses, no surveillance footage, no fingerprints on the contaminated meat found in Tom's yard. But Tom knew. The timing was too convenient, coming just days after Harold had lost a major vote to expand the dangerous dog ordinance to include size restrictions. Tom couldn't prove Harold's involvement, but the knowledge sat in his chest like swallowed glass, sharp and indigestible. The community's response to Rex's poisoning surprised everyone, including Harold. A vigil formed outside Dr. Chen's clinic. 37 people holding candles and homemade signs reading, "Get Well Rex" and "Justice for Tom's Dog." Children drew pictures, teenagers organized a car wash fundraiser for the vet bills, and elderly residents shared stories about their own beloved pets. Harold watched the vigil from his car across the street, his face unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. Patricia found him there at midnight, engine running but going nowhere. "Dad," she said, sliding into the passenger seat, "you need to see something." She handed him Emma's latest school assignment, an essay titled "My Hero." Emma had written about Rex, describing how he made the nursing home residents smile and helped a sad man named Mr. Tom remember how to be happy. The final line read, "Heroes don't have to be people. Sometimes they have 4 legs and know how to love without asking for anything back." Harold folded the paper carefully and handed it back to his daughter. "She can't understand," he said quietly. "She wasn't there when they brought Michael to the hospital. She didn't see what those teeth did to my boy." "But Dad, Rex isn't that dog, and Emma isn't Michael." "They're all that dog," Harold replied, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. August brought Emma's secret friendship with Rex, discovered when Patricia found her daughter in Tom's backyard, carefully brushing Rex's coat while he lay patiently in the shade. Emma looked up with guilty eyes, expecting punishment, but Patricia felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that her daughter was experiencing the kind of innocent joy that had been absent from their household for too long. "Grandpa says I can't pet dogs," Emma explained, "but Rex is different. He's sad like Mr. Tom was sad, and when I pet him we're both less sad." Patricia knelt beside her daughter and carefully extended her hand to Rex, who sniffed politely before allowing her to stroke his head. His fur was softer than she'd expected, and his dark eyes held an intelligence that reminded her of Michael's old German Shepherd, the one Harold never talked about anymore. Tom found them there 10 minutes later, mother and daughter sitting cross-legged in his yard, while Rex demonstrated his training commands for an audience of 2. Emma clapped when Rex rolled over, and Patricia laughed at the dog's obvious pride in his performance. The sound of her laughter, Tom realized, was something he hadn't heard since the HOA meetings began. "He's beautiful," Patricia said simply. "I'd forgotten how beautiful they are." That evening, Patricia confronted her father with a question that had been building for months. "What happened to Ranger?" Harold looked up from his newspaper with genuine confusion. "Who?" "Ranger. Michael's German Shepherd, the one in all the old photos. What happened to him after Michael died?" The silence stretched long enough for Patricia to count her own heartbeats. Finally, Harold set down his paper and walked to the window overlooking the backyard where Emma's swing set stood motionless in the evening breeze. "We had to put him down," Harold said without turning around. 3 days after the funeral, Ranger wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. The vet said animals sometimes die of grief, especially when they're bonded to children. It was the kindest thing to do. Patricia felt the truth settle over her like cold water. "Dad, what really happened the day Michael died?" Harold's shoulders sagged as if something that had been holding him upright for 10 years had finally snapped. "It wasn't Ranger," he whispered. "It was never Ranger." Labor Day weekend arrived with the kind of crystalline mountain weather that made postcards seem inadequate. The annual Millbrook Lake Community Picnic drew over 300 residents to the park's sprawling grounds, where barbecue smoke mingled with children's laughter and the distant sound of bluegrass music from the volunteer band. For most families, it represented the summer's final celebration before school routines reclaimed their lives. Tom arrived early with Rex, choosing a spot near the lake's edge where the dog could drink and cool off while staying visible to the entire gathering. Rex wore his therapy dog vest, a compromise Tom had suggested to ease community concerns, and carried himself with the dignified composure that months of training had instilled. Several children approached throughout the morning, asking to pet the famous dog, while their parents watched with mixtures of curiosity and caution. Harold attended only because Patricia had threatened to keep Emma away from future family gatherings if he didn't make an effort to participate in community events. He positioned himself strategically near the food tables, far from where Tom and Rex held court, but close enough to monitor the situation. This weekend marked the 10th anniversary of Michael's death, and Harold had been drinking, something Patricia noticed but felt powerless to address without triggering the explosive arguments that had characterized their relationship since Rex's arrival in Millbrook. The convergence of multiple crises began innocuously. Patricia's husband called from his deployment in Germany, their conversation quickly escalating into the kind of long-distance marital fight that made bystanders uncomfortable. Their voices carried across the picnic grounds as they argued about missed video calls, financial decisions made without consultation, and Emma's emotional needs during his absence. Other families tactfully moved their blankets farther away, giving the Hayes family privacy for their public dissolution. Emma, embarrassed by her parents' fighting and confused by the adult emotions she couldn't fully understand, wandered toward the lake where a family of ducks had captured her attention. The wooden dock stretched 20 feet into the water, its weathered planks scarred by decades of fishing expeditions and swimming lessons. Emma had always been drawn to water, bathtub overflows as a toddler, puddle jumping after rainstorms, begging to visit the community pool despite her limited swimming skills. The duck family consisted of a mother and 4 fuzzy ducklings, paddling near the dock's end where someone had scattered breadcrumbs earlier. Emma lay on her stomach, reaching over the dock's edge to trail her fingers in the cool water, making soft calling sounds to attract the ducklings closer. The mother duck, protective but curious, allowed her babies to investigate this strange, gentle creature who spoke their language. Tom was demonstrating Rex's obedience training for a group of impressed teenagers when the rotten board gave way. The sound was distinctive, a sharp crack followed by a splash and a child's scream that cut through the festival noise like a blade. Emma had stepped on a board weakened by years of weather and neglect, plunging through into water that was deeper than anyone realized due to recent heavy rains in the mountains. The lake's current, normally gentle during summer months, had been altered by the upstream rainfall. What appeared to be placid water near the dock was actually moving with deceptive strength toward the dam's overflow system 500 yards away. Emma surfaced once, her mouth barely clearing the water before the current pulled her under again. Harold saw his granddaughter fall and reacted with the desperate courage of a man who had already lost too much. Despite arthritis that made his morning routine an exercise in pain management, despite not having swimming in a lake for over 20 years, he dove from the dock without hesitation. The cold water shocked his system, and his inflamed joints screamed in protest as he fought against the current that was stronger than he'd anticipated. Patricia's scream alerted the entire picnic gathering. Families abandoned their meals and rushed toward the water's edge. But the horrible reality quickly became apparent. Harold was struggling as much as Emma. His arthritis-ravaged shoulders couldn't generate the power needed to fight the current, and the weight of his waterlogged clothes dragged him down. Both grandfather and granddaughter were being pulled toward the dam's concrete spillway, where the churning water would make survival impossible. The crowd formed along the shoreline, shouting suggestions that everyone knew were useless. The nearest lifeguard was volunteer firefighter Jake Morrison, who had driven to his own house to retrieve rescue equipment and wouldn't return for 10 crucial minutes. Several men discussed jumping in to help, but most were either poor swimmers themselves or smart enough to recognize that adding more victims wouldn't solve the crisis. Tom stood frozen for perhaps 3 seconds, watching Harold flail helplessly as Emma disappeared beneath the surface again. Rex pressed against his legs, whimpering with the kind of distress dogs show when their humans are in emotional crisis. The solution was obvious and terrible. Rex was the strongest swimmer within a mile of the lake, trained for water rescue during his therapy dog certification, and motivated by the kind of loyalty that transcends species barriers. But unleashing Rex violated every condition of the agreement that allowed him to remain in Millbrook. The HOA ruling had been explicit. Any off-leash incident would result in immediate removal. Harold himself had demanded this clause, and Tom knew that even a heroic rescue wouldn't erase the technical violation that would give Harold legal grounds to destroy everything they'd built together. Tom looked at Rex, who was already pulling toward the water with every instinct screaming at him to help. The dog's brown eyes held the same desperate intelligence Tom had seen the day he found him broken in the roadside ditch. Rex understood the situation, understood the choice, and was waiting for permission to do what he'd been born to do. "Go," Tom whispered, unclipping Rex's leash with hands that trembled from more than adrenaline. "Go, save them." Rex exploded toward the water with the focused power of 75 pounds of muscle and determination. His entry created a splash that sent ripples across the lake's surface, and his swimming stroke immediately demonstrated the difference between human panic and animal competence. While Harold and Emma fought against the current, Rex worked with it, angling his approach to intercept their path toward the spillway. The crowd fell silent except for Patricia's ongoing screams and Harold's increasingly weak calls for help. Rex reached Emma first, his training taking over as he positioned himself beside the drowning child. Emma instinctively grabbed his collar, and Rex began the methodical process of towing her toward shallower water, his powerful legs churning against the current that had defeated her grandfather. Harold's reaction to seeing the German Shepherd approaching his granddaughter was everything Tom had feared. Despite his own desperate circumstances, despite the obvious rescue attempt in progress, Harold's decade-old trauma overwhelmed his rational mind. "Get away!" Harold screamed, using precious energy to splash water at Rex. "Get away from her!" The dog ignored Harold's panic, focused entirely on bringing Emma to safety. But Harold's thrashing created a dangerous situation. His wild movements pushed Emma underwater again just as Rex was making progress toward shore. The dog faced an impossible choice: abandon the child to help the grandfather or risk both victims by trying to manage Harold's hysteria. Rex chose Emma, towing her the final 20 yards to shallow water where Martha Collins and Dr. Chen waded in to lift her onto dry land. Emma was conscious but coughing up lake water, her lips blue from cold and oxygen deprivation. The crowd cheered, but their celebration died as everyone realized Harold was still in the water, no longer calling for help, his movements becoming increasingly erratic as hypothermia and exhaustion took their toll. Without hesitation, Rex turned back toward the deeper water where Harold was now floating face down, unconscious and sinking toward the lake bottom. The dog's second rescue attempt was even more difficult. Harold's dead weight was harder to manage than Emma's desperate cooperation, and the current continued pulling them both toward the spillway with mechanical indifference. Tom waded into the lake up to his chest, his war-injured leg burning with each step on the uneven bottom. He reached Rex just as the dog managed to get Harold's head above water, and together they dragged the unconscious man toward shore, where paramedics were already working on Emma. Harold wasn't breathing when they pulled him from the water. His skin was gray with hypothermia, and lake water poured from his mouth as Dr. Chen began CPR with professional efficiency that couldn't quite hide her own fear. The crowd formed a respectful circle, some praying audibly, others simply bearing witness to the terrible mathematics of rescue. 2 lives saved by a dog whose own fate now hung in the balance of laws and regulations that suddenly seemed impossibly small compared to the magnitude of what had just occurred. The ambulance sirens wailed through Millbrook Valley as both vehicles raced toward Denver General Hospital, 43 minutes of mountain highway that might as well have been 43 hours for the families watching their loved ones fight for life. Emma rode in the first ambulance, conscious but shivering uncontrollably despite the heated blankets wrapped around her small frame. Patricia held her daughter's hand while paramedics monitored vitals that fluctuated with each mile. Harold's ambulance followed behind, its urgency marked by the silence of a man whose heart had stopped twice during the initial resuscitation attempts. Dr. Chen rode with him, her steady hands performing chest compressions while machines beeped their electronic warnings about hypothermia, water aspiration, and the kind of trauma that kills men half Harold's age. His lips remained blue despite the oxygen mask, and his pulse felt as fragile as moth wings against her fingertips. Tom and Rex stood in the hospital parking lot, both soaked and shivering, watching the emergency room doors swallow the people whose lives Rex had just saved. The irony was crushing. They'd risked everything to rescue Harold and Emma, but hospital regulations prohibited dogs inside the building where those same people now fought for survival. Rex whined softly, sensing the emotional turmoil radiating from every human around him. Understanding that something terrible was happening, but unable to comprehend why he couldn't follow his people inside to continue helping. Officer Jake Morrison arrived 30 minutes later, his face grim with the kind of expression that delivered life-changing news. Tom had known Jake since their Army days, had shared foxholes and fears with him during their deployment to Afghanistan, which made what came next feel like betrayal, even though both men understood it was just duty. "Tom, I'm sorry," Jake said, his uniform still damp from helping with the lake rescue. "Animal control is on their way. The HOA emergency ruling came through 20 minutes ago. Rex was off-leash during a public incident, regardless of the circumstances." Tom's hands tightened in Rex's damp fur. "He saved 2 lives, Jake. Harold's granddaughter would be dead right now if—" "I know what he did. The whole town knows what he did. But the law is the law, and Harold Brennan called this in personally before the ambulance even left the lake." Jake's voice carried the weight of enforcing regulations he didn't believe in. "I have to impound Rex until the city council can review the incident." Could be days, could be weeks. The crowd that had gathered in the hospital parking lot, 37 neighbors who'd followed the ambulances to offer support, watched in stunned silence as Animal Control Officer Sandra Martinez led Rex toward the van that would take him back to the same concrete kennels where he'd nearly died from poisoning months earlier. Rex resisted for the first time in his training, pulling against the leash to stay close to Tom, sensing that this separation was different from their routine departures. "It's okay, boy," Tom whispered, kneeling to wrap his arms around Rex's massive head. "I'll get you back. I promise I'll get you back." But his voice broke on the words, and Rex whimpered in response, pressing against Tom's chest as if trying to crawl inside his human's heart where they could never be separated. The van disappeared into mountain darkness, carrying Rex back to a world of concrete and fluorescent lights, while Tom stood alone in the parking lot where his neighbors avoided eye contact and shuffled their feet against asphalt still warm from the day's heat. Martha Collins approached him tentatively, her 73-year-old frame moving with the careful dignity of someone who'd survived enough losses to recognize another one forming. "This isn't right," she said simply. "That dog is a hero, and they're treating him like a criminal." Inside the hospital, Emma had been stabilized and moved to a pediatric room where her vitals gradually returned to normal ranges. She asked repeatedly about the dog who saved me, but Patricia struggled to explain why Rex couldn't visit, why the animal who'd pulled her from drowning waters was now considered too dangerous to enter a building designed for healing. Emma's questions carried the kind of logical innocence that made adult rationalizations sound hollow and cruel. Harold remained in the ICU, his condition fluctuating between stable and critical as doctors worked to reverse the damage from prolonged cold water exposure and oxygen deprivation. The hypothermia had stressed his 70-year-old heart beyond normal parameters, and pneumonia from aspirated lake water threatened to complete what the drowning had started. Patricia maintained a bedside vigil, dividing her time between her father's unconscious form and her daughter's increasingly pointed questions about fairness and heroism. The media attention began that same evening, sparked by cell phone videos of the rescue that had been uploaded to social media within minutes of the ambulances departing. Local news stations picked up the story first, framing it as a heartwarming tale of canine heroism overshadowed by bureaucratic inflexibility. By midnight, national networks were running footage of Rex being led away in chains while his victims, now officially designated as survivors rather than rescued persons, fought for their lives in hospital beds. The online petition started at 2:17 a.m., created by a stranger in Oregon who'd seen the story on late-night television. Free Rex the Hero Dog gained 3,000 signatures before sunrise, 10,000 by noon the following day, and 50,000 within 72 hours. Celebrity endorsements followed, with actors and musicians sharing the story across platforms that reached millions of Americans who'd never heard of Millbrook Valley but understood injustice when they saw it. Tom visited Rex daily at the animal shelter, but each visit became harder to endure. Rex had stopped eating regularly, his usual enthusiasm replaced by a depression that reminded Tom of soldiers he'd known who'd given everything for their missions only to be abandoned by the systems they'd served. If the dog's eyes held a confusion that broke Tom's heart. Rex couldn't understand why saving lives had resulted in punishment, why his greatest act of loyalty had led to separation from the human he'd chosen as family. Dr. Chen provided Rex's medical care at the shelter, documenting his declining condition in reports that she hoped might influence the upcoming city council hearing. Separation anxiety, she wrote, combined with environmental stress and possible depression. Subject shows classic signs of psychological trauma related to abandonment. Her clinical language couldn't capture the reality of watching a hero's spirit break under the weight of institutional indifference. The legal battle intensified when the American Civil Liberties Union offered to represent Tom pro bono, framing the case as a test of municipal authority versus individual rights. Their filing argued that emergency circumstances created exceptions to standard regulations, that Rex's actions constituted justifiable civil disobedience in service of human life preservation. The city council found itself defending a position that made them appear heartless on national television, while Harold Brennan remained unconscious and unable to speak for the regulations he'd championed. Emma's psychological evaluation revealed what her family had begun to suspect. She was experiencing trauma nightmares about drowning, but the only thing that calmed her anxiety was talking about Rex. Child psychologists recommended animal-assisted therapy as part of her recovery process, creating a cruel irony where the dog being punished for saving her life was the same animal she needed for healing. 3 days after the rescue, as Harold lay unconscious and Rex grew thinner in his concrete cell, Tom sat in Danny's untouched bedroom and contemplated the loaded pistol he'd kept in his dresser since returning from Afghanistan. He'd saved it for emergencies, for moments when the pain became unbearable and the future looked like an endless repetition of loss. Losing Rex felt like losing Danny all over again, like proof that love was always temporary and that trying to save anything was just an elaborate form of self-torture. But before he could make any final decisions, his phone rang with news that would change everything. Harold Brennan opened his eyes on the 3rd day to find his daughter Patricia sitting beside his hospital bed, her face etched with the kind of exhaustion that comes from watching loved ones hover between life and death. The machines around him beeped steadily, marking the rhythm of a heart that had stopped twice during the rescue and now beat with the tentative persistence of borrowed time. "Emma?" was his first word, barely a whisper through the oxygen mask. "She's safe, Dad. She's okay." Patricia squeezed his hand, feeling the tremor that had developed since the hypothermia. "The dog saved her. Rex saved both of you." Harold's eyes closed, and for a moment Patricia thought he'd slipped back into unconsciousness. But when he opened them again, they held a clarity that had been absent for days. "I need to see the footage," he said, his voice stronger despite the damage to his lungs. "I need to see what really happened." The hospital security video was devastating in its clinical objectivity. Harold watched himself panic in the water, watched his own terror of the approaching German Shepherd nearly cost Emma her life, watched Rex make the split-second decision to save the child first before returning for the man who had spent 2 years trying to destroy him. The footage showed Rex diving underwater to retrieve Harold's unconscious body, showed the dog's powerful strokes fighting the current that would have swept them both toward the spillway. "I fought him," Harold whispered, staring at the screen where his past self thrashed against his own rescue. "Even when he was saving Emma, I fought him." Patricia had been waiting for this moment, preparing for this conversation, since the day she'd asked about Ranger and learned the truth her father had hidden for a decade. "Dad, you need to tell me what really happened to Michael." "All of it." The silence stretched between them like a chasm filled with 10 years of misdirected grief. Finally, Harold closed his eyes and began to speak in the voice of a man confessing sins he'd carried alone for too long. "It wasn't a German Shepherd," he said. "It was a pit bull mix, 90 pounds of muscle and rage that belonged to my brother's girlfriend. A dog that had been beaten and starved and turned into a weapon by people who should never have owned a goldfish, much less a powerful animal." Harold's breathing grew labored, but he continued. "Michael saw that dog attacking the Hendersons' 2-year-old daughter in their front yard. Their parents were inside, didn't know she'd gotten out of the house." Patricia felt her world shifting as the truth she'd suspected for months finally emerged. And Michael tried to help. Michael and Ranger both tried to help. "Our German Shepherd, your brother's best friend, jumped that fence right alongside Michael, trying to protect that little girl from a dog 3 times his size." Harold's voice broke. The police report was confused because there were 2 dogs involved. By the time the animal control officers arrived, Ranger was as bloody as Michael, trying to pull that pit bull off my son even after he was already dying. The hospital room filled with the weight of a decade's worth of misdirected blame. Patricia understood now why her father had never spoken about Ranger's fate, why he'd systematically removed every photo of Michael with his beloved German Shepherd from their house. "Ranger died protecting Michael?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Ranger died protecting that little girl just like Michael did. The veterinarian said he'd never seen such loyalty. Ranger refused to let go of that pit bull even when his own injuries were fatal. If there hadn't been 2 heroes that day instead of 1, little Sarah Henderson would have died too." Harold turned his face toward the window, where autumn afternoon light painted the hospital room in shades of gold and regret. "I had to put Ranger down 3 days later. His injuries were too severe and he was suffering, but he'd already done what Michael would have wanted. He'd saved a child's life." The revelation hung between them like a bridge finally built across a river of grief. Patricia realized that her father's war against German Shepherds had never been about protecting children. It had been about protecting himself from confronting the truth that both his son and his son's dog had died as heroes, making their deaths simultaneously more meaningful and more unbearable. "So, when Rex arrived," Patricia said slowly, "it was like Michael and Ranger were asking you to remember who they really were." Harold nodded, tears flowing for the first time since Michael's funeral. "I've spent 10 years being angry at the wrong dog, fighting the wrong enemy. Rex isn't the dog that killed my son. He's the kind of dog my son died trying to be." The next day brought a phone call that changed everything Tom thought he knew about Harold's motivations. Dr. Chen delivered the message with barely contained excitement. "Harold wants to see you and Rex together. He's asked the hospital to make an exception to their no animals policy." Tom found Harold propped up in his hospital bed, looking older and frailer than his 68 years, but somehow more at peace than Tom had ever seen him. Rex approached the bed cautiously, his training overriding his natural wariness of the man who had been his primary enemy for 2 years. "I owe you an apology," Harold said to Rex, his voice still hoarse from the intubation. "Both of you." He extended a trembling hand toward Rex's head, and the dog allowed the touch, sensing something fundamental had shifted in this human who no longer radiated fear and hostility. "Harold, you don't need to," Tom began, but Harold raised his other hand to stop him. "Yes, I do. I need to tell you about Michael's dog, about what really happened, about why I've been wrong about everything for 10 years. Harold's confession took 20 minutes, interrupted by coughing fits and moments when his emotions threatened to overwhelm his damaged respiratory system. Tom listened in growing amazement as the true story emerged, a story of heroism that Harold had buried under layers of trauma and misdirected blame. "Rex isn't the enemy," Harold concluded. He's exactly what Michael would have grown up to be if he'd had the chance. Someone who risks everything to protect innocence. He looked directly at Tom. I'm withdrawing all opposition to Rex remaining in our community. More than that, I'm going to City Council tomorrow to ask them to honor him as a community hero. But Tom shook his head. You can't go to City Council tomorrow, Harold. You nearly died 3 days ago. Harold's smile was weak but determined. Then they'll have to come here. Because I've got something to say, and I've waited 10 years too long to say it. The emergency city council session was held in Harold's hospital room, an unprecedented move that attracted national media attention. Local television crews set up cameras in the hallway while council members arranged folding chairs around Harold's bed. Rex lay beside the bed wearing his therapy dog vest and displaying the calm dignity that had impressed everyone who'd worked with him. Harold's statement was broadcast live on 3 networks and shared millions of times across social media platforms. Speaking directly to the cameras with Rex visible beside him, Harold delivered what would become known as the Millbrook Redemption Speech. 10 years ago, I lost my son Michael in a dog attack, Harold began, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. For the past decade, I've been fighting the wrong battle, blaming the wrong animals, and dishonoring my son's memory by forgetting what he died trying to do, protect innocent lives. He paused to catch his breath, then continued. 3 days ago, a German Shepherd named Rex risked his own life to save mine and my granddaughter's. The same breed I'd spent years trying to ban from our community became our salvation when we needed it most. Harold went on to reveal the true story of Michael's death, clearing the record about German Shepherds and acknowledging the heroism of both his son and his son's dog. Rex represents everything Michael believed in: loyalty, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice for others. By honoring Rex, we honor Michael's memory. By accepting Rex, we accept the lesson my son died teaching us, that heroes come in all forms, and that love is stronger than fear. The City Council's unanimous vote to not only release Rex, but to officially designate him as Millbrook's Community Hero Dog was anticlimactic after Harold's emotional testimony. More meaningful was Emma's reaction when she was finally allowed to visit Rex in the hospital. The 8-year-old girl who had suffered nightmares about drowning immediately relaxed when she saw her rescuer, falling asleep against Rex's side while he stood motionless guard beside her chair. The transformation in Harold was complete, but not sudden. Over the following weeks, as he recovered his physical strength, he began volunteering at the animal shelter where Rex had been imprisoned. He worked specifically with German Shepherds, learning about their temperaments and capabilities from professionals who had dedicated their lives to understanding these remarkable animals. I'm not trying to become a dog person overnight, Harold told Tom during one of their new regular coffee meetings, but I'm trying to become the kind of person Michael would be proud of. The kind of person who judges individuals by their actions rather than their species. The final revelation came when Harold showed Tom and Patricia a box he'd kept hidden in his closet for 10 years. Hundreds of photos of Michael with Ranger, home videos of boy and dog playing together, and Michael's own journal, where he'd written extensively about his dreams of becoming a veterinarian so he could help animals like his beloved German Shepherd. Michael loved Ranger more than anything except maybe baseball, Harold said, watching Tom flip through pictures of a grinning boy with his arms around a magnificent German Shepherd. I let my grief erase that love from his story. I let fear rewrite history. The box also contained Michael's final school project, a research paper titled German Shepherds, Heroes in Disguise, where 12-year-old Michael had documented the breed's history of service to humans, their roles in police work and military service, and their reputation for loyalty and intelligence. The paper's conclusion read, "German Shepherds aren't dangerous dogs. They're dogs that will do dangerous things to protect the people they love." Tom read those words and understood that Michael Brennan had been wise beyond his years, and that Rex was simply fulfilling a destiny that had been written by a boy who died too young but had lived long enough to understand what real heroism looked like. 6 months later, spring arrived in Millbrook Valley with the kind of abundant beauty that made real estate agents rich and poets grateful. The aspen trees budded with tender green leaves, mountain wildflowers carpeted the meadows in impossible colors, and Millbrook Lake reflected the snow-capped peaks with mirror-like perfection that erased all memory of the tragedy that had nearly claimed 2 lives on its shores. Tom's house on Elm Street had been transformed in ways both visible and profound. The mortgage was paid in full, thanks to the book deal that chronicled Rex's story and the modest settlement from the movie rights that Hollywood had purchased with surprising generosity. More importantly, the house felt alive again, filled with laughter, conversation, and the comfortable chaos that comes when a home serves as headquarters for meaningful work. The Danny Mitchell Foundation for Animal-Assisted Therapy had been established in Tom's garage, which they'd converted into a training facility where veterans worked with rescue dogs to heal the invisible wounds of war. Rex served as the program's lead therapy dog, his calm presence and intuitive understanding of human pain, making him invaluable in helping other damaged souls find their way back to trust and connection. Tom watched through the kitchen window as Rex supervised the morning training session, where Marine veteran Sarah Chen worked with a rescued German Shepherd mix named Liberty. Sarah had lost her leg to an IED in Syria and struggled with depression and survivor's guilt that mirrored Tom's own journey. But with Liberty's steady presence and Rex's patient mentoring, she was slowly rediscovering her sense of purpose and self-worth. "He's teaching her more than we ever could," Dr. Rebecca Chen observed, joining Tom at the window with 2 cups of coffee. Their relationship had evolved naturally from professional necessity to personal affection, built on shared values and the kind of deep friendship that sometimes grows into something more meaningful. Rex understands trauma in ways humans can only theorize about. The wedding invitation on the refrigerator bore Patricia's name and that of her fiancé, Staff Sergeant David Morrison, Jake's younger brother who had returned from deployment to discover that love sometimes blooms in the soil of shared struggle. Patricia had found in David the kind of steady strength her father had always possessed, but had forgotten how to access after Michael's death. Their engagement had been one of many healing relationships that emerged from the community's collective reckoning with fear, prejudice, and the possibility of redemption. Harold arrived for their weekly coffee meeting looking healthier than he had in years. The pneumonia and hypothermia had left him with permanent breathing difficulties, but they'd also somehow freed him from the psychological weight he'd carried for a decade. At 69, he moved with the careful dignity of a man who had learned the difference between caution and cowardice, between protecting others and protecting himself from painful truths. "Emma wants Rex to be in the wedding," Harold announced, settling into his usual chair while Rex approached for the ear-scratching that had become part of their ritual. "Ring bearer, if you can believe it. Patricia's worried he might steal focus from the bride." Tom laughed, remembering his own concerns about Rex's star quality. The dog had become something of a celebrity, featured in national magazines and invited to appear on television programs about animal heroism. But fame hadn't changed Rex's essential nature. He remained focused on the humans who needed him most, whether they were veterans struggling with PTSD or 8-year-old girls who still occasionally woke up from nightmares about drowning. "How is Emma doing with the swimming lessons?" Tom asked, knowing that Harold had insisted on professional instruction after the lake incident. "Better than her grandfather," Harold admitted with self-deprecating humor that would have been impossible during his years of rigid control. "She's fearless in the water now. Says Rex taught her that scared doesn't mean helpless." He paused to watch Rex demonstrate a complex training sequence with Liberty. She wants a German Shepherd of her own when she turns 10. Patricia's agreed, and I've promised to help choose the right puppy. The transformation in Harold had been the most remarkable aspect of Millbrook's healing process. He now served on the board of Rainbow Bridge German Shepherd Rescue, using his organizational skills and financial resources to improve conditions for abandoned and abused animals. His experience with Rex had taught him that bureaucracy could serve compassion rather than fear, and that rules should protect the vulnerable rather than punish the innocent. The memorial garden dedicated to Michael Brennan had been completed the previous fall, featuring a bronze sculpture of a boy and a German shepherd standing together on a small hill overlooking the lake. The inscription read, "In memory of Michael Brennan and Ranger, heroes who taught us that courage comes in many forms." Harold visited the memorial every Tuesday, often bringing Rex with him to sit quietly among the flowers that community volunteers maintained year-round. "I've been thinking about expanding the foundation," Tom said, sharing an idea that had been developing for weeks. "Rebecca thinks we could franchise the model, help other communities establish similar programs. There are a lot of veterans who could benefit from what we've learned here." Harold nodded thoughtfully. Michael would have liked that. He always talked about becoming a veterinarian so he could help animals and the people who love them. This would be his kind of work. He pulled out a manila folder filled with financial projections and legal documents. "I've been working with my attorney on establishing an endowment, the Michael and Ranger Foundation for Animal-Human Healing. I'd like you and Rebecca to run it." The proposal represented more than financial support. It was Harold's way of ensuring that his son's death had meaning beyond the tragedy itself, that Michael's love for animals would continue to heal broken hearts long after the pain of his loss had faded into bittersweet memory. Patricia's wedding took place on a perfect June afternoon at the community center, where the contentious HOA meetings had once divided neighbors into adversaries. The transformation of space and relationships was symbolically complete. What had been a battleground for fear and prejudice became a celebration of love and second chances. Rex performed his duties as ring-bearer with the same dignity he brought to therapy work, walking slowly down the aisle with the wedding ring secured to a special collar that Emma had chosen. His presence in the ceremony represented more than cute novelty. It acknowledged the role that love and loyalty had played in healing a community's wounds and bringing together people who had forgotten how to trust each other. Emma, now 9 years old and radiant in her flower girl dress, walked beside Rex with complete confidence. The girl who had once been terrified of water and traumatized by her near drowning had become a strong swimmer and Rex's most devoted advocate. She carried herself with the quiet strength of someone who had survived real danger and learned that heroes don't always look like the ones in storybooks. During the reception, Tom found himself sitting with Dr. Chen at a table overlooking the lake, where everything had changed 7 months earlier. Rex lay at their feet, occasionally accepting treats from wedding guests who had once crossed streets to avoid him. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the water in shades of gold and pink that made the evening feel like a blessing. "Do you think we'd have found each other without Rex?" Rebecca asked, taking Tom's hand across the table. Tom considered the question seriously. Without Rex, he might have spent the rest of his life isolated in grief, unable to move beyond the loss of his first family. Without the crisis that Rex precipitated, the community might have remained divided by Harold's fears and regulations. Without the rescue that proved Rex's character, none of the healing that followed would have been possible. "I think Rex brought us all the family we needed," Tom said, watching Emma dance with her grandfather while Patricia and David shared their first dance as husband and wife. "Sometimes the best gifts come in packages we don't expect, from places we never thought to look." As if responding to his name, Rex lifted his head and looked at Tom with those dark eyes that had first reminded him of Danny. But now Tom saw something different in that gaze. Not the ghost of his lost son, but the promise of connections yet to be made, lives yet to be saved, and love yet to be discovered. The future stretched ahead of them like an unwritten story, full of possibility and second chances. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in our deepest fears. When Tom Mitchell rescued that broken German Shepherd puppy, he thought he was saving an animal's life. What he discovered was that Rex was saving his. Like so many of us who've reached our golden years, Tom had learned that loss is inevitable. We bury spouses, children, dreams, and pieces of ourselves along the way. We build walls around our hearts, telling ourselves it's wisdom when it's really just fear wearing a respectable disguise. But here's what Tom and Harold both learned at the edge of that lake. It's never too late for second chances, never too late to choose love over fear, never too late to discover that the family we need might not look anything like the family we lost. Rex didn't just save 2 lives that day, he saved an entire community from the prison of their own prejudices. For those of us who sometimes feel forgotten by a world that worships youth, Rex's story reminds us that our greatest contributions often come not from our strength, but from our willingness to be vulnerable enough to love again, deeply, and without reservation. Have you ever found unexpected family in the most surprising places? What second chance taught you the most about the power of love over fear?